Rashi. Little plug. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Chevron Zoom, you still hear me all right? Yeah? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. So today's daf is Kuf Beis, beautiful and incredible daf ahead of us. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the Shiur and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Dina Bas Pesach, Zechariah ben Zechariah. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Moshe and Chavi Abramson, for dedicating this last parak of Pesachim, Arvei Pesachim, as a zechus for the Refuah Shalema for Daniel Meir ben Chana. We hope that he, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, will have a complete and enduring refuah. All right, so with that, let us begin. So we really have a very exciting Gemara today with a lot of really fascinating sugyas. So let's pick up. Today's daf is Kuf Beis 102, but we left off. Let's go ahead and actually just begin from Meisvei again, if that's all right. We'll just go through it very quickly. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 lines up from the bottom. We read most of this already, but it's just easy to pick up at the beginning of it. So remember again, we are heavily steeped in the sugya of Shinui Makom. In what happens, remember again, this began as a discussion regarding Kiddush in Shul on Shabbos. Okay. This began as a discussion regarding Kiddush and Shul on Shabbos. Namely, when I hear Kiddush and Shul on Friday night, what does that do for me? So we had two really parallel discussions going on. Number one, what's the impact of it for Kiddush itself? Do I have to go home and make Kiddush again? So remember again, we had Rav saying that halacha lamaisa, you are Yotze Kiddush, but not Yotze Yayin. And then we had Shmuel, Rav said, Rav and Shmuel both agreed that halacha lamaisa, you have to go home and make another bracha on the wine that you drink. We had a machlokes regarding whether or not you are Yotze Kiddush. Rav said you're Yotze Kiddush. Shmuel said you're not Yotze Kiddush. And that turned out to be a machlokes regarding Kiddush b'makom su'uda. Does Kiddush have to be where you have your meal or not? And we went on and we discussed it. We subsequently used this then to launch into a more general discussion regarding Shinui Makom. Halacha l'maisa, what happens when you make a bracha on food in one location and then change your location? Ultimately, again, does that necessitate a new bracha or not? So with that, let's just pick this piece up very quickly again. So remember here, we had two interesting opinions. Machlokes, Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshes. So Rav Chisda said that halacha l'maisa, when we say that Shinui Makom requires a bracha, when is that? So interestingly enough, he said that's only by food items that don't require a bracha acharona in their original location. But if you're eating something that requires a bracha acharona in its original location, then essentially you are tethered to location A. And once you are tethered to location A, even if you subsequently actually change your location to location B, you do not require another bracha. Masha'in kain, if you're eating foods that do not require a bracha acharona in their original location, any shinui makom, any change of place, will necessitate the making of another bracha. Rav Sheshes said, echad zeh v'echad zeh. Rav Sheshes says, we don't get into that. I don't care what kind of food you're eating. If you start eating in one location, change locations to a new place, halacha l'maisa, you must make another bracha. Good. With that, we'll say very quickly, Meisvei reis the kasha b'nei chabur shayim subin l'shtos v'akur ragleim l'tzeis l'kras chazon l'kras kalo. If you have a chabur that's sitting and eating together, and what? Akur ragleim, they uprooted their feet. Remember again, that lashon is very important because, as we're going to see in just a moment, akru raglein indicates that they were rooted in the place. When are you rooted in the place that you eat? Only when? Only when? If you're eating something which requires a bracha achrona in it, the actual place of consumption, as the Gemara is going to spell out in just a moment. So the chabur is eating together. They hear about a chasen and kala that's coming. They could get up and run out to greet the chasen and kala. Kishen yotzin ain't doing a bracha l'mafreya. when they leave, they don't have to make a bracha achrona before they leave. And when they come back, they do not have to make another bracha. So when is this true? When is this true? I will say, when is this true? When they left behind a zakin or a chola. In other words, they left behind a member of the chabura. So by leaving behind a member of the chabura, that roots the rest of the chabura in place. But if they went ahead and they leave, and they don't leave any member of the chabura behind, then what? Tu'una bracha lemafreya kishen. Kishiyotzin tu'una bracha lemafreya kishen chozin tu'una bracha lechatchila. We'll say if no member of the chabura is left behind, everyone leaves. Then enachinami, they must make a bracha. They must make an after bracha, right? A bracha achrona before they leave, and when they come back, and if they want to resume eating, they must make another bracha as well. Says the Gemara, very important diuk, midiktani akru raglein. This is where we actually left off. The fact that the Brisa says akru raglein, they uprooted their feet. Michlal de bidvarim hatu'unim bracha lachrin bimkoman askinon. So we'll say lashon of akru means you are rooted somewhere. When are you rooted where you eat? Only when you're eating something which requires a bracha achrona in that very same location. And the only reason why halacha l'maisa you would not have to repeat a bracha rishona or make a bracha achrona before you leave, v'taima denichu sham zakin ochola hu d'chashen yotzin ein tu'in bracha l'mafreya kashen chol ein tu'in bracha l'chatchila aval lo hinichu sham zakin ochola kashen yotzin tu'unin bracha l'mafreya kashen chozrin tu'unin bracha l'chatchila. Kasha Rav Chisda. So Rabbi say this entire brayse is a kasha on Rav Chisda. Because remember again, what was Rav Chisda's shita? Rav Chisda held that halacha l'maisa, the only time that shinui makom requires another bracha is for the type of food that doesn't require a bracha achrona in place. But anytime you're eating something which requires a bracha achrona in its original location of consumption, halachically you are tethered to that original location. So that wherever you go, you don't have to recite a bracha achrona before leaving, and nor do you have to recite a new bracha rishona before continuing to eat. Now the brisa made whether or not you need a bracha achrona or new bracha rishona fundamentally dependent on leaving behind a member of the group. Nothing to do with the type of food you're eating or the bracha achrona dynamic. That's a kasha of Chisda. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. So Nachman by Yitzchak said, top of Kuf Beis, you're right. Man Tana Akiros. I will say, who is the author of this brisa, who spoke about, again, this concept of Akiros, right? Remember again, who is the author of this brisa that says that whether or not you need a bracha achrona before you leave, or a new bracha rishona when you come back, is fundamentally dependent on leaving members of the group behind? That's Rabbi Yehuda, the Sanya, because Rabbi Yehuda said, or the Brisa says, Chaverim shayim subin va'akur raglein leilech lebeis hakneses or lebeis hamedrash. Well, this is very interesting. If Chaverim are sitting together and they go ahead and literally they uproot themselves. Now, both said, anytime we're talking about uprooting themselves, so b'pashtus that means they're in the middle of eating. They stop eating, they uproot themselves. Leilech lebeis hakneses Ola Beis Hamedrash. They go ahead and they get up to go to shul, to go to learn. Kishen Yotzin, when they leave the meal, ein tu'unin bracha lemafreya. They do not have to make a bracha achrona prior to leaving. We both say obviously the unstated reality here is, of course, it is their intention to what? To continue to eat. Right? Obviously, again, if they're finished and they're leaving, of course, you have to bench, you have to say bracha achrona. The case over here is they're getting up to go to shul, they're getting up to go to the Beis Medrash to learn, but their intention is to resume eating. So what's the halacha? Kishen yotzin, when they leave for shul, the Beis Medrash ain't doing a bracha l'mafreya, they do not require bracha achrona. Ukishen chozna, when they come back, ein tu'unin bracha lechatchila. They do not have to make another bracha before resuming to eat. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, comes on Rabbi Yehuda and he says, when is this true? When is this true? Bizman she'nichu sham miktzas chaverim. The only time this is true is if you left some members of the chabura behind. Right? So there is some chabura representation that remained at the Tesuda. So we'll say Rabbi Yehuda's logic is, as long as there are some members of the chabura that remain behind, essentially, again, that tethers the chabura to that location. Therefore, again, however, again, if I did not go ahead and leave behind some members of the chabura, then kishen yotzin to una bracha lemafreya, ukishen chozrin to una bracha lechatchila. Both say if the entire chabura leaves, then einach inami, they must make a bracha achrona before departing, and if they come back and want to resume eating, they must make another bracha rishona. So both say, so it turns out that halacha l'maisa, there's now a third opinion. So we have again now working backwards as Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda says that whenever an individual who's part, let's assume right now a part of a chabura, whenever a chabura is eating in somewhere, and now again the chabura or members of the chabura go somewhere else and are going to eat in the second location, the requirement they have to either make a bracha achrona before they leave or a new bracha rishona when they come back or resume eating somewhere else is going to be fundamentally dependent on whether or not there is some representation of the chabura in the original location. Rabbi Yehuda says, as long as there are members of the original chabura left behind, then even if some go ahead and get up and go to shul, go to learn, but when they leave, they don't have to make a bracha achrona, and when they come back, they need not make a bracha rishona. That's in contrast to the position of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says it's not a chabura function, Abosai. What is it a function of? What is it a function of according to Rav Chisda? The food. What type of food are you eating? Are you eating food which requires a bracha achrona in its original location? In which case, again, the food anchors you. So Abosai, everyone's agreeing on the. I should say not everyone, but Rav Chisda and Rav Yehuda are agreeing on the same fundamental idea, which is generally shinui makom, changing location, is going to require a new bracha. Why is shinui makom going to require a new bracha? Why? Hesech hadas. So the only way to avoid that is if you are anchored to your original location. The machlokes simply is what represents or what constitutes a proper halachic anchor. Rav Chisda will say, food is your anchor. Food is your anchor. Food is, right, if you're eating something which requires a bracha achrona in the original location, that's your anchor. Rabbi Yehuda will say, no, what's your anchor? What's your anchor? Your chevra, people. Your chabura is your anchor. I will say it's interesting. People use different things in life to anchor themselves, right? We all look for an anchor to keep our things steady, to keep ourselves steady. So some people rely on relationships, right? Some people rely on gashmius. People rely on different things to keep themselves anchored in life. Then, of course, there's the position of Rav Sheshes. Now, Rav Sheshes says that halacha l'maisa, neither food nor chevra can keep you anchored. Essentially, I will say, the reality of your life is wherever you are. So if you change places, it's very nice you left friends behind, or it's very nice you ate a food that requires a bracha achrona in place. Shinui makom, by definition, is hesach hadas, and therefore requires a new bracha. So we'll say this is our three-way machlokes. Now, I just do want to remind you that halacha l'maisa there is a fourth opinion, and that is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, remember again, Rabbi Yochanan holds that halacha l'maisa, he holds that shinui makom doesn't create hesech hadas. We're going to come back to him in just a moment, right? Remember, again, I will say, we introduced the shita. I'm sorry, I know it's a lot of opinions here, but we introduced the shita of Rabbi Yochanan in yesterday's daf because we began with Rav and Shmuel about what happens when you make Kiddush in shul. And remember, again, interestingly enough, according to Rav and Shmuel, everyone was agreeing that Yedeyayin lo yatsa, that when you go home, you definitely have to make a new bracha on wine because that's shinui makom, right? The machlokes was about Kiddush. Rabbi Yochanan said, even Yedeyayin yatsa, right? Because Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, shinui makom is not goreim a new bracha. So again, so just keep that in mind for just a moment. So back to the Gemara. Ella, taima, tibidvarim hatu uni bracha lachain bim koman. Rather, again, the reason says the Gemara is as follows. When you're eating something, taima debidvarim hatun bracha lacharim bimkoman tichashen yotzin ein tun bracha lamafreya kishen chozrin ein tun bracha lachatchila. So we'll say, so now the Gemara says, so the reason ultimately again that shinoi makom, a change of location, would not go ahead and necessitate a new bracha is because you're eating the type of food which requires a bracha achrona its original location, which anchors you to original location. Aval dvarim shein tu'uni bracha la'achrein bimkoman. But if you're consuming something which does not require a bracha in its original location, bracha achrona, then what? About dvarim shein tu'unim bracha lacharim bimkoman. But if you're eating a food which does not require a bracha achrona in its original location, afilu l'rabbanon kishein yotzin tu'unim bracha l'mafreya or kishein chosrin tu'unim bracha l'chatchila. See, I will say, here's what's interesting is throughout this entire conversation, it sounds like everyone would agree that if you're eating a food item which does not require a bracha achrona in its place, everyone will agree that halacha l'maisa shinui makom necessitates a new bracha. Because let me clarify one point. We just introduced the position of Rabbi Yehuda. What did Rabbi Yehuda hold? Right? What did Rabbi Yehuda hold? In order to be tethered to the original location, what do you need? Chabura. But I just want to point out, even Rabbi Yehuda is agreeing that if you look at the context of the Brisa says akru raglehen. Akru raglehen means what was the chabura eating? What was the chabura eating? An item which required a bracha achrona in its location. So it turns out that Rabbi Yehuda is really adding on to Rav Chisda, not simply disagreeing with him. Rav Chisda says all you need in order to remain tethered to your original location is the type of food which requires a bracha achrona in place. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, that is not enough. You need that type of food and what? And what? And chabura. What the Gemara is remarking on is something very interesting. It sounds like according to everyone, if you're eating food which does not require a bracha achrona in place, and you leave, what's the halacha? You have to make a bracha achrona and a new bracha rishon if you want to resume eating. Because both say it appears that with, in other words, the machlokes only is you need food and chabura. But everyone's agreeing, it sounds like, that you need food. So if you're drinking water or you're eating a piece of chocolate where there's no din of bracha achrona in the place where you ate, like Barin Nefashos, there's no din of bracha achrona in the place where you ate, it sounds like everyone will agree that if there's a shinui makom, you must make a bracha achrona before leaving, and you must make a bracha rishona before you resume eating. Well, if that's the case, this is why I just mentioned this to you before, Lema tevet yivted Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi say, does this not refute the position of Rabbi Yochanan? Because remember again, Rabbi say, you saw this. I'm sure you underlined this in your Gemara. This was 3 lines up from the bottom on Kuf Aleph, Amud Aleph, 101a, where Rabbi Yochanan said, Af yidei yayin nami yatsu. And remember again, the Rashbam said, at the end of the day, she'in tzarich lachzor levarich al yayin shari lo hisich daito b'yitzia. So maybe second says, Rabbi Yochanan holds that shinui makom does not require a new bracha. To which the Gemara says, "V'lavni osivna chadazimna." Again, I got it. The Gemara, look at the Rashbam for just a moment. It's the last of the short lines in the Rashbam. Lema tevet yiftu Rabbi Yochanan da'amar la'el shinui makom yitzarach levarich v'lo maflig bein dvarim hatuunin l'dvarim sheinin tuunin. Both Rabbi Yochanan just said that Allah l'maisa shinui makom does not require a new bracha. Now I will say, it happens to be, it's not a totally fair kasha on Rabbi Yochanan, because Rashbam explains this is very different, right? The case of Kiddush is very different, because I know that I'm going from shul, ultimately again to go ahead and come to my home to eat the Suda. Rabbi said, but you see something amazing, that according so far to the other opinions who say that Shinui Makom does necessitate a bracha, whether it's Rav Chisda, whether it's Rav Sheshes, whether it's Rav Chisda, Rav Chisda, Rabbi Yehuda, they'll say that Shinui Makom requires a new bracha, even if it's your das to eat somewhere else. See, both say, according to this approach, what the Gemara is saying is as follows: if I start my Suda in location A, and I know that I'm going to location B, it's quite possible that Shinui Makom will still necessitate, or possibly still necessitate, a new bracha. It's only according to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds Shinui Makom does not require a new bracha. So pretty much everything we're talking about until now is a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. To which the Gemara says, you're right. We already raised the kasha against Rabbi Yochanan. You're right. To which the Gemara says, Neima nami meha nami tehevit yufta. Einachinami. This is just another refutation of Rabbi Yochanan's position. Beautiful. Amnach Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Hu adin dafilu dvarim shein tu'unim bracha lachrein bimkoman. Nami ein tzrichen levarich. So Rabbi Yochanan will retort, and he will say, the truth is, even by food items which do not require a bracha achrona in place, shinui makom will not require a new bracha. V'hadik tani akru raglehen. And the only reason why the brayso we mentioned before used lashon of akru raglein, which Rabbi say we understand, uprooting their feet means what? What were they eating? What were they eating? Something which required a bracha achrona in place. Lahodiacha kochad Rabbi Yehuda is in order to teach us the strength of Rabbi Yehuda's position. Da'afilu dvarim shetu'unim bracha la'achrein b'mkoman taima de'nicho mikzas chaverim. Avalo inicho mikzas chaverim kishen yotzin tu'unim bracha l'mafreya kishen chozin tu'unim bracha l'chatchila. And I will say the only reason Rabbi Yochanan will say the brayso illustrated its case with food items which require a bracha in place is to teach us the strength of Rabbi Yochanan's position. Did Rabbi Huda. That Rabbi Yehuda holds that food is not enough to anchor you to your original location. You need what? According to Rabbi Yehuda? Food and chabura. So both sides. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you need food and chabura to anchor you. According to Rav Chisda, all you need is food to anchor you. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, you need nothing to anchor you. And according to Rav Sheshes, nothing anchors you. Okay, the difference between those last two opinions, I will say, is that Rabbi Yochanan will hold even shinui makom doesn't require a new bracha. Rabbi Sheshes will hold every shinui makom requires a new bracha. Beautiful. Tanya Kava said Rav Chisda. So I will say there's a brayso that supports Rav Chisda. So remember again, position of Rav Chisda was everything is dependent on the food that you're eating. If the food anchors you in your original location, i.e., it requires a bracha achrona in the place of consumption, then shinui makom will not trigger the need for a new bracha. Says the Gemara, Tanya Chavas Rav Chisda, Chaverim shayim mesubin lishtos yayin. If Chaverim were sitting together to drink wine, va'akru ragleihen v'chazru, and then they got up, left the place where they were drinking, and came back, ein tzrichen levarich. You don't have to make another bracha. So I will say simple brayso, and I will say it's clear. So all according to this, since they were drinking wine requires the ala gefen, and the ala gefen has to be in the place where you were drinking. So Allah l'maisa, even if they left and came back, they don't have to make another bracha. Beautiful. Tana abundant. B'nei chabura shay mesubin l'kiddush l'nayom. So both say. So now watch this. We're still not finished. B'nei chabura are sitting Friday afternoon. Suppose remember again, we had a whole extensive discussion about what you do if you have you're eating. Let's assume for a moment you started your Sudan Erev Shabbos beheter in a permitted fashion before 9 hours of the day. So therefore, what now? It's Shabbos. Now it's Shabbos. Suppose remember again, what's nachalokes? Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says, finish up. Rabbi Yehuda says, you have to stop. And remember, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to be oker shulchan. You have to remove the table. What was our compromise position? A little chazara? Pores mapo makadish. Good. So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, pores mapo. Says the Gemara, so watch this. So you have a chabura that's sitting, and then again Shabbos starts. Listen to this. Koshal yayin. So what do they do? They bring the guy, the balabas. They bring the balabas a cup of wine. It's always great in these cases of they bring them, right? Great, they bring them. Yes. Garçon, right? Whoever it is, the they. Of course, everybody has the they who brings them. Right? So the Gemara says, they go ahead and they bring him a cup of wine. Va'omer alav kiddushas hayom. So watch this, and he says kiddush. V'sheni omer v'sheni. Then they bring him a second cup of wine. Omer alav birkas hamazon de Rabbi Yehuda. So also Rabbi Yehuda holds that Allah l'maisa, Shabbos comes. Remember, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when Shabbos comes, you can't drink wine. You can't eat anything before Kiddush. That's the way it works on Shabbos. Once Shabbos starts, you can't do it. So what do you do? So remember again, there's an unstated principle according to Rabbi Yehuda that the Gemara does not explicitly talk about, which is Akiras HaShulchan. According to Rabbi Yehuda's model, once Shabbos starts, the first thing you do is take the table out. That's the first thing you do. You take the table out, right? Or again, at least pores mapa. But really, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you take the table out. They bring him a cup of wine. He says Kiddush. Now both say, now the Kiddush over here is, what are you not doing? First, you're not benching. In other words, I might have thought that I have to finish up. I said, no. Go ahead. First cup of wine, you're going to go and you're going to make Kiddush because you can't do really anything before you make Kiddush. Then go ahead and recite Birkas Hamazon on a second cup of wine. So the Gemara will say, I'm trying to point out, we're not going to get into it over here, but there is a whole machlokes about this statement of Rabbi Yehuda. The last Rashbam over here, he says, we'll just read the first part, Tan Rabbanan, and he says, Kida'am Rabbi Yehuda la'el, umil hoil ve'egia shas kiddush tzarach lekadesh tchila. So there's a lashon acher, there's an alternate version of Rabbi Yehuda that Rashbam here talks about, and that Tosafos on Amud Beis, the first Tosafos on Amud Beis, which we're not going to get into. I'm just giving you the Maramakom. Rabbi Yossi says, so we'll say, watch this. Rabbi Yossi holds, you don't have to stop. We'll say, this is Shitas Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi holds, keep eating your meal. Keep eating your meal. It's Shabbos, it's okay. Keep eating. Gamru, Amud Beis. Gamru, once you finish your meal, Kos Rishon Mevarech Ala Berachos Hamazon. So according to Rabbi Yossi, I will say, what you do is, when you finish eating, they're going to bring you a cup of wine. Over that first cup of wine, you're going to go ahead and make, you're going to bench, right? And then on your second cup of wine, you're going to go ahead and make Kiddush. Good. So both say, so really fascinating machlokes. My Suda goes into Shabbos. Shabbos starts, according to Rabbi Yehuda, got to make Kiddush. Akiras HaShulchan, first step, make Kiddush, and then go ahead and recite Berachos Hamazon. I will say, now the Pashas, what it sounds like according to Rabbi Yehuda is, you're going to bench right after you make Kiddush. You're going to bench right after you make Kiddush. And then what are you going to do? The Pashas, what are you going to do? You'll probably wash again. I mean, you don't have to. Remember again, we saw beforehand that one could fulfill the mitzvah shalosh sudos on Shabbos by having 3 meals on Shabbos day. That works as well. But just want to point out in Rabbi Yehuda's, like, in the pure model, you would stop the meal when Shabbos starts, remove the table, recite Kiddush cup 1, recite Berachos Hamazon cup 2, and then wash again for Su'udas Shabbos. That's Bepashos, so that sounds like. Rabbi Yossi, you don't have to stop. Keep pressing, continue, not pressing, but keep eating. When you finish your meal, first cup of wine, recite Berachos Hamazon. Afterwards, go ahead and recite, Kiddush. Good. So Rabbi said, listen to this. Amai. So the Gemara says, why do you need 2 cups of wine? What? Listen to this. V'nemrinhu litarvayu achad kasa. So we'll say, so first of all, take a look. Before we get to this, take a look at the Rashbam. V'nemrinhu tarvayu. Why don't you recite both things on 1 cup of wine? So look at the Rashbam. Kiddush hayom Berachos Hamazon. Ul Rabbi Yossi kaparach dil Rabbi Yehuda kevan dimafsikin v'tzarech akira shulchan tzarech shnei kosos. So we'll say, the Rashbam really says this kash is really on Rabbi Yossi. According to Rabbi Yossi, why don't you just go ahead and make Berachos Hamazon and Kiddush on 1 cup of wine? So we'll say, in Rabbi Yehuda's case, it's a little bit more complicated. Why? Because halacha l'mais, you have an akiras hashulchan. There's like a meal rupture that's there that ultimately divides between Kiddush and Berachos Hamazon. We'll see that a little bit clearer in just a bit. But according to Rabbi Yossi, remember again, what are you doing? You're finishing up your meal, and then at the end of your meal, you're going to bench and then make Kiddush. So in Rabbi Yossi's model, you need 2 cups of wine. Ask them, why do you need 2 cups of wine? Why can't you just bench and ultimately recite Kiddush over the same cup of wine? To which the Gemara will say, here we get into an incredible sugya. Incredible sugya. So it says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because Rabbi say we don't recite, literally translated, 2 kiddushos. We'll see exactly what that means, but we don't make 2 kiddushos on 1 cup. My taima, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, lefi shein osin mitzvos, chavilos. Because Rabbi say we do not perform mitzvos in bundles. We don't bundle mitzvos. Now look at Rashbam for just a moment, the first wide line. Why don't we do mitzvos, chavilos bundles? The mechse alav kimasui. Because Rabbi say this has the appearance ultimately of a burden. When you bundle mitzvahs together, it looks like ultimately, again, it's a burden to you. Therefore, you're trying to discharge multiple obligations simultaneously. So to recite Berachos, according to Rabbi Yossi, to recite Berachos Hamazon and Kiddush on 1 cup is chavilos. Looks like you're just trying to get everything done, and we don't do that. So we'll say just a word about this. So this is actually very interesting because I will say, where does this concept of ein osin mitzvos chavilos. In other words, it sounds very beautiful, and certainly makes sense from like a hashkafic perspective, that a person should perform mitzvos in a way which shows that you love the mitzvahs. And when you bundle things together, it looks like you're just trying to discharge obligations. So there's a whole discussion. This concept appears 3 times throughout Shas. Interestingly enough, in very different types of contexts. So for example, the Gemara Maseches Sota brings down that if you have 2 women who are sotos, right? 2 women who are suspected of adultery, we don't go ahead and give them to drink at the same time. Or you're not mitaher 2 mitzoraim at the same time. Or if you have 2 avodim who want to stay with their master and therefore need to have their ears pierced, we don't pierce them at the same time. So there are many halachas. Now, interestingly enough, the concept of ein osin mitzvos chavilos is, of course, it's not learned from a pasuk, it's a rabbinic concept. So it's Chazal telling us that in the performance of mitzvos, a person has to go ahead and conduct themselves. The way I do a mitzvah has to behaviorally appear as if it's not a burden. Now, what's very interesting about this is as follows. This goes back to a general concept of v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. So remember again, what does Rashi HaKodesh say in v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha? To love Hashem your God. So remember, all the Mefarshim are bothered by this mitzvah. Why are they bothered by it? Because remember, you could legislate a lot of things, but the one thing you can't legislate is emotion. You can't tell people how to feel. You can tell people what to do, but you can't tell people how to feel. So Rashi HaKodesh says something amazing. So Rashi says, Aseh devarav me'ahava. When you serve Hashem, make it look like you love Him. Make it look like you love, which is incredibly profound. What Rashi is saying is you may not love Him, and you may not love the mitzvahs, and you may not love all the things that you have to do, but when you do it, it should look like you love it. It should look like you love it. And I will say, what's the yesod? It's in paragraph. How you feel is informed by how you act. If you act with positivity, if you act with love, then ultimately, again, the feeling of love will come. That's the way it works. We often think the feeling informs the actions. It's not true. People wait for feelings a whole lifetime. It's the actions which shape the feelings. Ein osin mitzvos chavilos is the same idea. When I perform a mitzvah, when I perform a mitzvah, if somebody sees me performing a mitzvah, my goal is that it should look like I love what I'm doing. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Maybe I feel like it, maybe I don't feel like it. But at least behaviorally, the way I act should exude a love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for Torah and for mitzvos. If you start bundling things together, it has the appearance that this is something which it's a load on you. And so you're just trying to go ahead and take care of as much stuff as you can, as quickly and as expeditiously as possible. Therefore, I think Chavilos is a derivative. If you want to know where it comes from, I think it comes from this din of v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. It comes from Aseh devarav me'ava. It's one of these appendage concepts of Rashi's interpretation of this mitzvah. But I'll just share with you something amazing. If you take, let's go through the Gemara first. Below, is that true? Is that true that we don't do mitzvahs in bundles? V'atanya, we learned, hanichnas lebeisa b'matzei Shabbos. If someone comes into their house on Matzei Shabbos, you come home after Shabbos. So we have to make Havdallah. Mevarech ala yayin va'ala mar va'ala besamim va'acher kach omra Havdallah ala kos. So what do you have as part of Havdallah? You make a brei pri hagafen, you make a brei mereh eish, borei minei besamim, and then you make the bracha of Havdallah, which is the bracha of Hamavdil. What happens? Vim ein lo ela kos echad. We'll say, what happens if again I only have 1 cup of wine? So now the situation over here is, I ate shalosh shudis, I didn't yet bench. So I need a cup of wine for 2 things. I need a cup of wine for birkas hamazon, for benching, and I also need a cup of wine for Havdallah. But I only have 1 cup of wine. So what's the halacha? So this says, the Gemara v'im eno ela kos echad, manicho la'achar hamazon, o mishalshalim kulan la'acharav. So the Gemara says, no problem. What do? Just recite benching on the cup, and then immediately after benching, recite Havdallah on the kos as well. What? You just told me what? What did we just say? Einos and mitzvos chavilos. We just said, according to Chavilos, we have such a simple idea. You don't need 2 cups, 1 cup. bench, and then recite Berachos, and then recite Kiddush. So we'll say, so again, you told me, no, we don't do that. We don't do multiple mitzvahs on 1 cup of wine. What are you talking about? You just told me if you have 1 cup of wine, yad shalosh this. You need to bench on a kosin to make Havdallah, that you could first bench, and then go to make all the Berachos of Havdallah in the same cup. So obviously you can't, quote unquote, bundle mitzvos on 1 cup of wine. If you take a look at the Rashbam says, Mishal Shalom, it's in the wide lines, 2, 4, 6 lines in Mishal Shalom, Shal Shalas. Shemechabram Yachad im Birkas Amazon. Alma Amrinan Shtei Brachas Al Kosechad Havdallah Birkas Amazon. So I'll say, so you see from here that you can do multiple things on 1 cup of wine, to which the Gemara says, no. Ein lo shiny. This is different. This is talking about a case where you don't have. You only have 1 cup of wine. Okay. So I will say, if you only have 1 cup of wine, under those circumstances, you could recite benching and then Havdallah. Or, in other words, lav dafka, just benching and Havdallah. If you only have 1 cup of wine, then einachinami, you could potentially use it for multiple things. But we're talking about where you have more than 1 cup of wine. So if you have more than 1 cup of wine, Allah lamaisa, ein osim mitzvos chavilos. The Gemara says, I will say, this is so exciting. So for those of us, maybe, for some of us who maybe learned this in our early Gemara years, we're going to get now to YKNH and all of these acronyms, which were absolutely meaningless to us when we were in school. And now, Mirza Hashem, again, we're going to learn it. And we'll say, not only that, this is a major sugya this year. Because remember, again, the first Seder is Matzah Shabbos. So this whole discussion, YKNH, all this, it's very exciting. It's very exciting. So I'll say, so now watch this. Incredible. Is that true? So I'll say, so now remember, what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. Everyone's going to accept the principle of Enos Mitzvos Chavilos. Right? Except when? When you don't have. Right? So in other words, if you don't, I will say now, remember, I want to point out, you could accept Enos Mitzvos Chavilos even when you don't have. Right? Remember again, it's very simple. Then I would say, don't bench with a kos. Right? Or don't make Havdallah calls. In other words, there is another option. So yet what the Gemara is saying is, in general, we don't do mitzvos chavilos. That's the Gemara saying. Maybe the one exception is, if you only have 1 cup of wine, then maybe you could double up on the mitzvos on the same cup. But other than that, in osim mitzvos chavilos. The Gemara says, really? Listen to this. V'hayam tov shechalios achar Shabbos. Wow, halacha l'maisa for us. But what about when Yom Tov falls out right after Shabbos? Now, we'll say now, halachically, this is fascinating because remember again, what do you have happening at the same time? The islay ba'amarav yaknaha. So the Gemara says. So now remember, what happens when Yom Tov falls out on Matzei Shabbos? So I will say, remember again, Rav says you have yakna. What's yakna? Yayin, Kiddush, Ner, Havdallah. Now I will say, leaving aside, remember, the only 2 things we care about in this equation are Kiddush and Havdallah, right? What's unique about when Yom Tov falls out on Matzei Shabbos is you have Kiddush and Havdallah on the same coast. So I will say, so now you see, now Rav's just saying yakna. We'll get into this machlok in just a little bit, but Lamaisa, the point over here is that you see that Yain and Kiddush are being made on the same cup. Now says the Gemara, now we're assuming, just Rashbam points this out, and this is very exciting. The Rashbam assumes that the case in question is the first night of Pesach. Why the Gemara makes that assumption, we'll see. It's the first night of Pesach. And yet you see that you're making Kiddush and Havdallah on the same cup of wine. To which the Gemara says, no. This is not the first night of Pesach. How do you know it's not the first night of Pesach? Amri, midelo amar zman. Because I will say, what's missing from his bundle there? The Zah, right? The Zayin, the Zman, the Shechianu. The fact that Shechianu is not in there tells us what? Michlal de b'shvi shal Pesach askinan. It must be that what? It's the last day of Yom Tiv, which is on Matzei Shabbos. We'll say, right? That's how this falls out this year also, right? Right? Last day of Yom Tiv for us, right? Achron shal Pesach is Sunday. No? Okay. Yeah, good, whatever. Right, so whatever the situation is, right? The Gemara is talking about over here that halacha l'maisa. We're not talking about where the first day of Pesach falls on. Yeah, Achron shal Pesach is Matzei Shabbos. Achron shal Pesach is Matzei Shabbos. He'll say so we're not talking about over here. Where halacha l'maisa. The first day of Pesach is on Shabbos.
This is the last day. How do I know this? The Gemara says, now what does it matter if you're setting up this case on the first day of Pesach or the last day of Pesach? If there's one thing we assume you have a lot of on the first night of Pesach, it's what? Wine. So therefore, again, but if there's one thing you don't have a lot of on the last day of Pesach, it is wine, right? It's possible that mamish, it was a good yantiv. It was a good yantiv, so mamish, I'm down to my last cup. Therefore, what the Gemara says, the chomai, the havelei, achilei, the leslei. So we'll say, so it's possible, maybe the case of where Rav says, you could say, yayin, kiddush, ner havdallah, kiddush and havdallah on the same cup, is dafka the last night of Pesach. And again, it would make sense because in Rav's not mentioning Zman, he's not mentioning Shechianu. So I can't be referring to the first night of Pesach, it must be referring to the last night of Pesach. Maybe it's only the last night of Pesach where maybe you've exhausted your wine supply. That's when you could recite Kiddush and Havdallah on the same cup of wine. To which the Gemara says, maybe by the last night of Yom Tov, you don't have any more wine left, and that's how you could recite Kiddush and Havdallah on the same cup, but that enachinami under regular circumstances, you would not recite them on the same cup. The Gemara says, Yom Tov Rishon de Islay. But one second, let's go back for just a second. Everyone knows that at the beginning of Yom Tov, in general, not just Pesach, but every Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah v'samachta b'chagecha, meat and wine. People have plenty of wine in their house. Now the truth is, the reason why this conversation is especially true by Pesach is also going back to the first Mishnah Pesachim. Remember again, who has wine in their house on the beginning of Pesach? Everyone. Even who? Afilu ani, right? Afilu ani lo yifkesu lo me arba kosos. Sefer Rabbi say we know for sure that come the beginning of Pesach, everyone has wine. So watch this. Vayom tov rishon de islay va'amar Abaye yak zina. Varava Amar Yak Nahaz. Very, very exciting. We'll see this in greater depth. This is a homachlokis as to the order of Berachos when it comes to the first night of Yom Tov, first night of Pesach that falls on Motzei Shabbos. But I will say, but leaving aside the order of the Berachos, what does everybody agree with? Everybody agrees that what are you doing on the same cup? Kiddush and Havdallah. So you see that we see Osin Mitzvos, Chavilos. We're bundling Kiddush and Havdallah on the same cup. Don't tell me you don't have wine, because you do have wine. This is a case of the beginning of Pesach. Everybody's wine. There's enough wine. If you wanted to do Kiddush and Havdallah on 2 cups, there's enough time to do Kiddush. There's enough wine to do Kiddush and Havdallah. So what's the pshat? Ella, boss, here we go. Ella, Havdallah the Kiddush, Chada Milsihi, Berachos Hamazon the Kiddush, Trey Milininhu. So we'll say a fascinating answer, to which the Gemara says, when we say Ein Osim Mitzvos Chavilos, this really refers to 2 separate mitzvahs. For example, benching and Kiddush. So benching and Kiddush, which have nothing to do with each other, 2 separate mitzvahs, bundling them on the same cup, ultimately again is Osim Mitzvos Chavilos. But I will say this is incredible. Havdallah and Kiddush, says the Gemara, are the same thing. Chada mitzvah. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at the Rashbam. Kiddusha v'Havdallah chada milsihi tarvayhu mishum kiddushas yamim tovim ninhu u'ba'Havdallah atzmahu maskir kiddushas yamtiv damavdul ben kodesh lakodesh mevarich. So we'll say, so the truth is, both Havdallah and Kiddush make reference to what? The Kiddush of Yamtiv. So thematically, they're very much linked. So because thematically they're linked, it's really looked at not as 2 separate or 2 disparate mitzvahs, but rather what? 1 mitzvah. Therefore, because they're looked at as 1 mitzvah, we will not say, it doesn't become a problem of osin mitzvos chavilos. I will say, I just want to point out something very interesting. What the Gemara is suggesting over here is, we accept the premise of ein osin mitzvos chavilos. We won't bundle mitzvahs. Unless, of course, you have no choice. Right? Let's say a case of where there's only 1 cup of wine, or where the mitzvos are thematically linked, like Kiddush and Havdallah. But if the mitzvos are not thematically linked, like benching and Kiddush, we won't say Chavilos. Also, I'll just point out to you what's fascinating about this. I just mentioned to you before that the makar of Ein Osim Mitzvos Chavilos is like being mashke 2 sotos, where it's the same mitzvah. It's true it's the same mitzvah, but it's 2 different people. That's also called Chavilos. It could be the same mitzvah, but 2 different people. But if it's the same person and 2 mitzvahs, and the mitzvahs are thematically linked, That's not called Osim Mitzvos Chavilos Chavilos. Also, I'll just tell you, there's an incredible message in this as well, that Havdallah the Kiddush Chada Milsihi. Both you understand the profound lesson in that? What does it mean? Kiddush, Havdallah and Kiddush Chada Milsihi. They're both saying, if you want Kiddush, if you want Kiddusha, if you want holiness in life, the first step is Havdallah. The first step is distinguishing. I have to figure out in life what's Kodesh, what's Chol, what's Tameh, what's Tahar, what's Mutter, what's Asr, until I create and concretize and solidify categories of right and wrong. And I know the things that are good for me to engage in and the things I separate from. The Havdallah, the Kiddush, Chada Milsihi. Only when there's Havdallah, ultimately, again, can there be the Kiddush of Kiddush? You know, sometimes in life, our greatest challenge, and the reason why sometimes we don't get real traction in life growth, is because we allow ourselves to live in a world of gray. We do things, we behave in ways, we maintain certain associations and connections in things that are objectively not good for us. Not dafka that they're sinful, they're just not good. They're just not conducive for my growth. But I find myself mired in this world of gray, which is often why I can't really self-actualize in a way I know I'm capable of doing. That's why the Gemara says, Havdallah, the Kiddush, and the order here is very important. First, you have to make Havdallah. What should I be doing? What shouldn't I be doing? What should I be engaged in? What should I not be engaged in? Who should I remain connected to, and who do I have to place a little bit of a distance at? What activities are good? What activities are not good? What's conducive to my growth? What's not conducive to my growth? Be mavdil. Be mavdil. Once you're mavdil, ultimately, again, then there is Kiddush. I will say one last piece. I'll show you. Look at Tosafos. So we're not finished this. The YKNH now is going to be our sugya tomorrow, but there's a great Tosafos here. Tosafos she'ein omrim shtei Kiddushos al kol secha. You see this? Well, it says Tosafos. V'yesh no, again, watch this. So now what we've established is you can't make two brachas, or you shouldn't make two Kiddushos on one kos. V'yesh no again b'chupa mitam zeh shelo lomar sheva brachos al kos birkas hamazon. Ela mavian kos acher. They'll say, watch this. We know this is why it's Sheva brachas. Right, you have a person who's leading benching at the end of the suit. A person is leading benching. He benches on a kos, and then what do? We bring another cup for Sheva brachas. Another cup for Sheva brachas. Why do we bring another cup for Sheva brachas? So it says Tosafos, ve'ein mevarchen al Hashem ber pri agafen keven shekvar berach al kos birchas hamason ki ein nachon levarich pa'amayim. Because it's not good to make, you will say, so remember again, interestingly enough, one cup is for benching, one cup is for Sheva brachas. Why? Why two cups? Ein osin mitzvos chavilos. However, Rabbeinu Meshulam haya omer hakol kos echad. Rabbeinu Meshulam said, no. By Sheva brachas, after benching, you make everything on one cup. Why? Delo dami leberkas hamazon the Kiddush the trei milininu, because it will say again, it's not similar to, let's say, benching and Kiddush, which are clearly two different things. Kidamina b'samach aval hacha chada milsihi the berkas hamazon goreim leberkas nisuin uberkas erisin the nisu. I'm sorry the berkas hamazon goreim leberkas nisuin, because it will say Rabbeinu Meshulam disagreed. Rabbeinu Meshulam says no, you only need one cup. Why do you only need one cup? Because halacha l'maaseh Rabbeinu say, what triggers Sheva brachas? What triggers it? Benching. V'haraya, if you don't have a meal and you don't have benching, you don't have Sheva brachas. I don't mean the Sheva brachas under the chuppah. I mean Sheva brachas again from the Suda and on through the 7 days. You only have Sheva brachas if you have a meal. Therefore, Rabbeinu Meshulam said they're one and the same. Essentially, Rabbeinu Meshulam would say that kind of benching and Sheva brachas is just like what? Just like what? Kiddush and Havdallah. They're the same thing. It's only, so therefore he goes on, Uberkas Erusin, Uberkas Nisuin, no Gulama Shtei Kosos. We'll say under a chuppah, we recite Berachos Erusin and Berachos Nisuin, right? The two parts of the learning. We do it over two different cups. The time of the Regilim Zebelo Zeb. We'll say why is that? This is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Why? Because often, historically, you see, I will say today, under the chuppah, we do Erusin and Nisuin together. We do everything together under the chuppah. But historically, there was often up to a year in between Erusin and Nisuin. Because they were separate processes, therefore, ultimately, again, the custom developed to do them over two cups under the chuppah, even though technically speaking, you could do it all under one cup. So we'll say, so just really fascinating. So the reason I'm pointing this out to you, I will say, is this is a good Tosafos to keep in your back pocket. Because halacha l'maisa, we will do benching and Sheva Berachos over 2 cups, but it's good to have that Rabbeinu Meshulam in your back pocket, because should you be at a Sheva Berachos where for whatever reason there's only 1 cup of wine, which is just an unacceptable situation for any simcha, right? Obviously, you don't have good enough friends if there's only 1 cup of wine at the end of Sheva Berachos. But Lamaisa, again, it's interesting to note that if there is only 1 cup of wine, Yeshami Lismoch to go and use the same cup for benching as well as for Sheva Berachos. So we'll stop over. We'll continue Hashem with this tomorrow.